Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney.
And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bookish Hour. I am Sarah Burr.
Hi, folks. I'm J.C. Kenney, and it's an exciting night tonight. I think we're going to take a trip down a dark alley by ourselves, as I think it's time to get bookish on that note, Sarah.
My favorite thing to be. Bookish. And as JC said, we have got a wonderful show for you tonight. Our guest this evening is the fascinating John Hoda. He is here to talk about all things mystery with us. It's going to be an eye-opening conversation, but you might be asking, if you haven't met John before, why, Sarah, is this going to be so eye-opening? John, would you like to tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your incredible background?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity this evening. And I'm excited about this as well. So I come to you as a writer, but prior to that, and still as of today, I am a licensed private investigator. I've been an investigator over 44 years, first as a police officer, suburban Philadelphia, and then an insurance fraud investigator. And then I saw how much money I was spending on private investigators. I became a private investigator myself. And for the last 25 years, have done that. Always have been a storyteller, always, had a group around me at a party or a get together, and they couldn't wait for the next story for me to serve up. And a while ago, I just got the idea that I wanted to get an idea out of my head onto paper. It had nothing to do with mysteries or police procedurals. It was a sports book of all things, but it taught me how to write. And I thought about this, and I thought about how much enjoyment I had writing that book, that I decided that I wanted to make writing my second career. So as I'm phasing out of the investigative part, the gumshoe part, the real stories are becoming fictional ones. And I'm enjoying this process so much more. And so is my cat, Chloe. So
Chloe
anyway.
is our other special guest this evening.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Woo.
Yeah.
Well, our viewers are in for a treat, because not only are they going to get to hear about how your careers have really influenced your stories, your writing, and your characters, but they also have the ability to get access to 3 free short stories from your Gwendolyn Strong series. And so, folks, if you are logged in, you're in the YouTube chat, you will see that we have posted a link to John's short story collection. Make sure that you sign up for the download. You can enjoy John's work and get a little sneak peek of what's in store for his Gwendolyn Strong series, which is your most recent endeavor. Is that correct, John?
Yes, that's right. I completed the 4-book series and the 3 short stories just this past month. The 3 short stories went out last month. The 4th book in the series, Milford Bed and Breakfast, which was my locked room mystery, an homage to Agatha Christie and John Dixon Carr, came out in December 19th. So very, very happy with it. I'm getting some nice reviews, and I enjoyed the process of doing that. So yes, the Gwendolyn Strong series, my tagline for it is that my protagonist is a retired school teacher, kindergarten teacher, and I say that everything she learned about solving mysteries she learned in kindergarten. So, and I really like it. It's a fair play, traditional leaning in the way of Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers, series set in a small town in America, Milford, America. We won't say what state. It's like The Simpsons, Springfield. And I just like the fact that from page 1, the readers can follow along with Gwen as she susses out the clues, and maybe they can beat her to the conclusion. I hope they do, because that tells me that I've got some smart readers.
That's so cool. So now Gwen is not your only protagonist you've written.
No.
Could you tell us about some of especially your FBI agent, who I think is really, really cool?
Yes. Out of that original sports book, I carried forth several characters, believe it or not, into a police procedural. And one of them was a woman. Well, at the time, she was a girl, a sophomore in college, going to school for an accounting, and she was wanting to be an FBI agent. Well, fast forward 20 years later, and now she's an FBI agent in Philadelphia. And I finished a sports novel, on a happy note. But she was a character that I had that I said, what if? What if she's now towards the end of her career? What if she's, that the FBI has kind of turned away from being the alpha dog in crime fighting to more of the domestic intelligence gathering arm since 9/11? What if she's kind of been, sent to a backwater squad, just, waiting until her retirement? What if? And that's out of it. The first book in the series, 6-book series, was Odessa on the Delaware, set in Philadelphia, where she has to figure out who the killer is. And there's an interesting twist at the end, where there are some truths that she finds out that are very close to the bone, so to speak. So, but she is, as I said, older now, 47, working outside of the traditional FBI apparatus, the bureaucracy of the FBI. That's why it's called the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And in the following books, she has to put together an ad hoc team of pickup players, for lack of a better word, that have seemingly different skills, or maybe aren't as skilled, but have a desire to try to find the truth. And it's those people that she works with to solve the crimes. A very interesting little note about Marcia O'Shea, that's her name, is that when she's directed by the assistant director of the FBI to work on such sensitive cases that she's not even allowed to use their mainframe. She has to work outside of their mainframe, and she can't work with the local FBI office, and she has to be very reticent about seeking help from the locals. So it's really a difficult challenge for her. I put a lot of obstacles in her way. And of course, the cases aren't easy. So it just makes it even more and more difficult. So that was very enjoyable writing it. And a lot of it I drew upon from my background. And a lot of it, the police procedure came easy. I didn't have to call a homicide cop up to ask about this. I knew it. I didn't have to ask what a crime scene looked like in this situation. I knew it. I knew what kind of a gun would have the safety and which one wouldn't. And those are the type of things that made it easy for me to write a lot of this. But it was always me trying to write her as a way that she was discovering the information, maybe a step behind the reader, so that the readers were always with me through the course of the investigation, following the plot. So yeah, thanks for asking.
John, since the police procedure was something that you didn't have to research because you'd lived it, you'd worked it, what elements, when it came to Marcia's story and Gwen's story, did you find that you did have to really delve into and flesh out?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's the rub, as some famous author once said. I had to learn how to write. I mean, I was a great storyteller, but I had to learn how to write. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn how to write believable characters that readers would want to ride along with, either in the squad car or the brown plain wrapper, as they say, and they would want to know what's going on in her mind, what drove them individually. And I think I became better book by book at engaging the readers emotionally with my strong female protagonists. And that was a little difficult for me to learn how to do it. But then, as time went by, with good editors and good beta readers and good critique groups, I learned how to do this better and better. Get down, pick myself off the ground after the red ink, sit down and say, okay, this is what we have to do, and do it. I've drawn a lot of learning in the last year or so from craft books related to the emotional craft of writing. And actually I'm involved for the past year now in a study group where we're studying one particular writer's approach to emotional craft. And it's actually Donald Moss, spelled MAASS, Moss,
Mm-hmm.
The Emotional Craft of Fiction and the Breakout Novelist. And there's exercises in the books that we as a study group work on every single week. And it's a nice feedback loop that we have where we all work on the same exercise. So we're all on the same thing, as opposed to some critique groups where everybody's working on their own thing and we're critiquing different things. No, we're all critiquing the same exercise. And it's been very, very helpful, especially as it relates to the emotional craft of fiction and trying to help the readers identify with your protagonist and move forward. I'm fond of saying, Sarah and JC,
Yep.
JC, that I now know what I don't know. And I know it sounds kind of strange, but at the time, I was just telling stories and getting it down on paper. And some editors would kind of rope me back and get me into the right area and then tell me about some structural things that I would need to worry about, where the inciting incident would come, where the midpoint should come, the midpoint, how to start the climax. But basically there was a lot of things about description and, story elements that I would have to learn. And I was learning as I went along, but it was really this part, the identification of the reader to the protagonist, that I felt that was most challenging for me. And I've been getting better at it. Let's just say, I've been getting better at it. So that's been the most telling thing about it that I would have to say. And I'm enjoying the process. I realized that I didn't become a good investigator overnight. It took me 44 years to get to the point where I knew what I knew. Now, how can I say within 5 years of writing that I am an expert writer? No, what I am, I'm still on that journey. It's very humbling, but I'm still excited about the opportunity because I think that I'm learning how to write better and how to attract readers' attention, that they want to be involved with the stories and they want to know what's going to happen next to my protagonist. So,
I think.
Well, and speaking of protagonists, sorry, Sarah.
Oh, no, go for it.
So speaking of protagonists, it's interesting, perhaps to some folks, that your protagonists have all been women, extremely capable women. Was there a conscious decision behind that to choose to have a woman as your main characters in these books?
Absolutely, it was. It came out of, well, the first one was just that I had this badass FBI agent in my sports novel, and I just thought, what can I do with her? But realistically, having a strong female protagonist, I think in a male-dominated business, such as crime fighting or sleuthing, I thought was an interesting way of engaging my readers into some of the more difficult things that were involved with the male hierarchy in those series and those situations. But for me, over a 44-year career in the civil side of the business, I was exposed to a lot of very intelligent, very driven female investigators. And what I like to say about them is I've had 44 years of observing very good female investigators. And I stole all of their traits for Marcia O'Shea and for Gwendolyn Strong. And for all their bad traits, I just used myself. So it was easy. That was a no-brainer. So yeah, I know. But and that's why I went that direction. I just felt that both of them were faced with the difficulty of having to solve a crime, but also the difficulty of a male-dominated police hierarchy of like them knowing all or them knowing knowing better. Let's put it that way, knowing better.
Mhm.
And I just felt that was like, well, you know what? No, we're not going to go that way. Instead we're going to show somebody that has some smarts and can have a lot of positive character traits that can get them through the series and get them to a successful conclusion of the case. So
I'm fascinated by how you have managed to write these strong women in two very different roles, and how their traits, there are similar traits, there are different traits. I'm wondering, John, if you can tell us a little bit about you started writing with Marcia, and then Gwendolyn came later. How did
yeah.
you decide to make the switch from police procedural FBI agent to a kindergarten teacher in a traditional mystery?
Yeah.
Because those are very two different types of crime
Yeah.
solving.
It is. And I have to tell you honestly that it was influenced by my reading. Now, bear with me a little bit while I say this. When I first was a cop, I read Joseph Wambaugh, The Onion Field, The Choir Boys, his first book in that series, The Blue Knight, the one even before that. And I read them all. In fact, I had Joe on my own podcast. It was wonderful. Great talking to him. But then I also read Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch and Lawrence Block's Matthew Scudder, Martin Cruz Smith's Arkady Renko with the Russian series. I'm blanking out on the first book. Gorky Park. But anyway, all through my working career, I had on my bedstand or my nightstand these hard-boiled detectives. And that was really easy for me to go back and forth between real life and those guys in terms of what was going on and the way the cases were being solved and the interactions and what they had going on. But then I did not read Agatha Christie or Dorothy Sayers until I became a writer. And then I started to read and watch, how she did it with Hercule Poirot. I said that right. Miss Marple and Lord Peter Wimsey through Dorothy Sayers. And I got to see the amateur approach to things. Now, keep in mind, I moved from being law enforcement to where I was working on, in fraud and felony cases to where I was working a whole gamut of work as a private investigator. So I was starting to move more into the private sector as well, more of it as not as an amateur, but not as a professional. I am a professional licensed private investigator, but not a badge carrying one. So it was a sort of a drift for me to do that, where I could now start to see things from that standpoint. And I had to get into the head of my kindergarten teacher almost from ground zero. And that I knew that she had good observation skills after having to be in a kindergarten for 35 years and making sure that the kids were all safe and watching them and being in there in a very relational moment with the kids in a very in the moment time as kindergarten is, but also with her very good deductive reasoning, which then brought me back to Sherlock Holmes. And I said, okay, now I can feel comfortable with that. So I built upon the in the moment observation skills of her with good deductive reasoning. And that's how I built the way that Gwendolyn Strong approached the world. And then we became, the plots would amplify that and would give the readers the idea that this wasn't coming from law enforcement per se. Now, there was a cheat. there was a cheat. I have to tell you what the cheat was. Her daughter, Erin LeGrand, is the sidekick, and she's a true crime junkie. And she knows every serial murder case going back to Jack the Ripper. And she has an encyclopedic knowledge of this, and has, it's like a vacuum for Oxygen and True Discovery and all those shows, and Crime Con, which is a real thing that goes on once a year with amateur sleuthing. And so she fills in those law enforcement blanks for her, which makes it easy. It's a nice device. So between the two of them, I felt that I had that happy medium, Sarah, where I could move forward with her. The other thing about it was I wrote the police procedurals in third person close, which gives you a little bit of a distance, but you could still get in the head of the POV character. And I became so enthralled in first person present that for the cozies, that I said, that's what I want to do. And so I started writing in my critique groups and my study groups, all kinds of short stories in first person present, just to get those muscles working, like going to the gym and working a different set of muscles. And I wrote all of the Gwendolyn Strong story in first person present. And that brings a ton of immediacy to the scene. Everything's through her eyes. Every single scene, POV, is hers. And I just felt that really gave the reader a chance to be right with Gwendolyn in the solving of the mystery. And I think it brought more immediacy to it. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's why I made the change and did the things that I did differently. So.
I think the POV makes a ton of sense, especially in the amateur sleuthing sphere, because the reader is more inclined to have the same kind of thoughts as an amateur sleuth rather than somebody who has been trained, they've gone to school, they've gone to the police academy, so that there's a more genuine connection with how somebody thinks when it comes to those amateur sleuths. So I think that and the present that had to be hard to work through, because as writers, we're kind of usually trained to write in the past, and so
Yeah.
I imagine that shifting to all present was a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it was. And but I fell in love with it. I really fell in love with it. There is a cozy mystery writer out of the Berkshires, which is the Massachusetts mountains that are not the Appalachians. Her name is Joan Livingston, and she writes a first-person present story of a former editor who had a bunch of files in her desk that were unsolved before she was unceremoniously fired as a editor at a small town paper. Well, she decides to become a private investigator or an amateur sleuth and starts doing the work. And it was first person present, and it hit me like a 2x4 to my head how immediate it was. Now, the storytelling was good. The characters were great. Loved the fact that, there's like little hillbilly towns up in the Western Berkshires. Loved it. But it was the telling of it from her standpoint that just arrested me. And I just said, I got to do this. So I started to learn everything I could. I started reading other writers that wrote first person present. I became more interested in that style. And then, of course, I practice. And now, in my most recent novel that I'm working on, which will remain unnamed, I'm writing first person past. So I had to get those muscles back from, third person past to get into the, said instead of says. Everything's now in the past tense, but it's still through the eyes of the POV character. So I think that's a nice happy medium for me right now. So I'm kind of excited about that. So, yeah.
That's great. The other question that I had for you to elaborate on is Crime Con. Can you tell us more about that? Because I never heard of is it amateur sleuth convention, or what? How does that work?
Yeah. Do you have an hour? No. the first one. So a lot of it hinges around the original podcast that were like the granddaddies of it all, like the Making of a Murderer, or the serial podcasts, and then there was the Oxygen and the Discovery on true crime, 48 Hours, those type of things. And what they have is a true crime following that they figured, the organizers of this figured, well, what if we brought some of the stars from these shows, which are real life cops, and some of them are actors. What if we bring all the podcasters together in this true crime genre? What if we bring them all together for a convention once a year, and let's see how it went? And I think the first year they had like 3,500 attendees, and it's just grown and grown and grown ever since. I attended one several years ago in New Orleans. My wife and I went, and I had other reasons for going there, but essentially I was just blown away. We were in a large convention center down in New Orleans, the Hilton, right, in a stone's throw from the Mississippi River. And I was just blown away by the rows and rows and rows of 8-foot tables of a different podcaster or a different presenter of some type of true crime activity that you'd be interested in. And it was just rows and rows. Wow. It was crazy. And then they had Nancy Grace, they had Dr. Henry Lee, they had Paul Holes, they had a lot of the name stars, as their marquee people, on one-on-one discussions, and then also clips from their different shows and upcoming shows that were coming up. And true crime is truly an unbelievable force. Now, there has been a slight thing that I write about in one of my last books, Elm City Towers, where there's a podcaster who has a Facebook group that they're actively investigating a cold case. And this is something that I first observed working successfully in CrimeCon with some people that were down there. A woman name comes to mind, Sheila Wysocki, a private investigator out of Tennessee, who had a podcast and put together an ad hoc group of people with a Facebook group. And they went about bringing light to cases where law enforcement had either turned their back or had given up or was, soft pedaling it. And it was just amazing to see how all those amateur sleuths were working together in that synergy from the Facebook group, along with investigators that were doing field work, and then it being reported on in a podcast. Oh, wow. You talk about something that's cutting edge and that's very unique. And I said to myself, at some point, I'm going to have to write about that. And I did. So I fictionalized it. But in any event, really some really cutting edge stuff. And don't kid me. I will tell you that there are a lot of good stuff is coming out of these cold case reviews being done by podcasters with people chiming in from Facebook groups or closed Slack channels, whatever, about obvious things that the cops don't see. Because like you said, Sarah, they have a mindset that's different. The cops have a mindset that's different from the average Joe or Josie that just has a curiosity or maybe a little bit of inside knowledge on how certain things work that the cops don't, and say, well, no, that's not that. That's this. It's because of this. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, look at that. So anyway, yeah, you can see I get a little excited about it. Yeah.
I know. I'm like have to make a note to attend this at some point. I'm adding that to my list of Comic-Con, CrimeCon, because true crime podcasts I absolutely love them.
But it'd be like Nevada. I mean, it would be like going to Mecca, honest to God.
Sorry about all my coughing. I've been getting over a cold, but I do, since we're about halfway through the hour, I do want to take a second to send a little shout out to folks who are hanging out with us this evening. Mark, Farmhouse Reader, Marcia, DHB, thank you all, and everybody else for tuning in with us. And, John, Marcia commented, and I think this is a really interesting comment that I'd like to get your take on. She mentioned that for her, writing dialogue is really a trick to her, and especially with you're from Philadelphia. Philadelphia, certainly that East Coast, there's a certain dialogue that I think we think of maybe from a stereotypical standpoint. Can you talk about what your approach to dialogue is, and do you make any specific efforts to try to help use colloquialisms or things like that to help ground that story really into a specific place?
Yes, I do. And that's a quick answer, but I'll tell you that for 44 years, I had the window seat to life, to all type of crime, all type of investigative activity, all things investigative, as I like to say. And I was an expert interviewer. I learned through 44 years from even my college days that I wanted to be the best interviewer that I could be. And I learned everything I could about investigative interviewing. So, and I mean cognitive interviewing, the read technique, you name it. I went through courses on it, scientific linguistic interrogation, all of it. And so dialogue for me is like water for a goldfish. I mean, I can't separate myself from it. So I fall into dialogue really easy because I've been so practiced as a listener, and having conducted so many thousands of interviews of truth tellers and of deceivers in my career, and just fact witnesses as well. And I found that the isms, and that's the colloquial isms that you talked about, are so baked in wherever I'm writing them that it just flowed naturally for me. But yet I will tell you, I visited every single site where I wrote. Philadelphia, even though I was from Philly, I visited Philly. Clearwater, Florida, Clearwater. Detroit, 3 days in Detroit, in the Arab American community, where much of my work was set in Detroit Wheels. West Reading Traffic, which is a little borough next to Reading, Pennsylvania. Okay, so I kind of, stayed in PA. But I visited there, and I spent time in diners. I spent time talking to people. I spent time in convenience stores, and there were things where I was picking up on things, bought the local newspapers, listened to the local TV at night, so I got the idea of getting a setting, and that dialogue was also part of the setting, that the way people talk. Now, I won't put on accents. I won't try to Pittsburgh yuns and yo in Philadelphia. I won't try to do that because I think it's disingenuous. But I think I can get the patter right, and people fall into that and they understand where I'm coming from. No one's ever complained that I used language or isms from Detroit that really were in Arkansas. So I've been fortunate that I've been able to do that. But no, that's a long-winded answer, but it came from a lot of study in my career leading up to that point. Anybody that is writing dialogue, I really honestly think that you should watch movies that are set in those locales during the time period that you're writing them. I'm laughing at myself right now because the book that I'm not talking about is set in historical Victorian London.
Oh,
wow.
So I'm watching, like, if you want some fun stuff, Enola Gay. I'm not Enola Gay. That's an airplane. Enola Holmes.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the younger sister of Sherlock Holmes. Two beautiful stories. They were perfect for me for my setting, my time. And they don't get into a lot of Cockney. I mean, and it's just very well done. But, you immerse yourself that way. You immerse yourself with local A lot of local documentaries that were written or produced at the time are easy to find on YouTube or Google, so you can get into that setting relatively quickly and hear how people spoke. You know, if you're going to talk about a West Virginia coal mining strike, 1950s, 1960s, there's a lot of stuff there that you can grab where you don't have to get into the slang or the twang, but you can get the rhythm of the language and what's important to the different people that are speaking. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
John, you'll have to come back when you can talk more about the book that must not be named, because
Yes.
talking about historicals is, I mean, I find it fascinating because the transporting yourself back to that time is such an exercise in itself. So you'll have to come back and chat with us once
Oh,
you can do a little bit more.
Yeah, I will. I promise. Now, see, that's my hook into another talk. And I will. I promise. Believe me, I promise. Because you talk about exercising all kinds of different muscles. Oh, my God. And I'm just so happy that I am. I'm growing as a writer, and I'm stretching as a writer, and I'm not afraid to fall down and get back up again, because if I don't try, I won't know. I could have stayed in my comfort zone, writing hard-boiled detective novels, which I loved. But I knew there was more that I could do, and there was more that I wanted to try. And there was more that I wanted to see if I could get an interest from with other readers. So I'm not afraid to say it. I mean, now, would I go from sci-fi to rom-com? No. I'm staying in my lane of whodunits, following the leads and getting to the end and hoping that the reader has a satisfying, feel that, they were along for the ride.
Well, along that line, those are some really, juicy tidbits here, and I appreciate you sharing. And it's a perfect segue to a question from the audience.
Okay.
Grace says hi, and she'd like to know, what is the most valuable thing you've learned since you started writing?
To connect the reader emotionally to the protagonist.
Oh.
And if you don't do that, it's a plot-driven action thing, and it is. They're observers and they're not participants. And it was also the hardest thing for me to learn too, because I thought as a real life detective that it was about following the clues and getting, and then weaving the plot lines and putting in the red herrings and sending people down blind alleys. And I thought it was all that stuff, but I realized, yeah, it is, but you need to want the reader to ride along with the protagonist, like to feel like they're there. They're in the interrogation room. They're at the crime scene. They're at a situation where two people are facing off, and they're right there with it. And if they're not emotionally invested in it, they're not going to care about the story. They're not going to care. I always thought that, not always. I originally and erroneously thought that writing great plots was what people were interested in. And I realized that better character-driven novels with how do I want to say it? A better character-driven novel with an okay plot will have a more invested reader than so-so characters in a highly driven plot. And I don't know how to say it otherwise than that, but that's the thing that I had to learn the hardest. My editors nibbled around the edges with me on that. They didn't say that my characters were cardboard stereotypes of, detectives or FBI agents, but they just wanted to know more what made them tick, what made them think, what made them feel. Mm-hmm. And that's the things that I think I had to learn to address better. And I like I said earlier tonight, I didn't know what I didn't know. And it was through time that I came to realize this. And when I saw this with other writing, I realized that what I wasn't doing. So I became at some point, I became a writer that read as opposed to a reader that reads. Does that make sense?
Completely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I became a writer that read, it was like, I now appreciate what they're doing there and how they're doing it. And I now see what makes that tick. Now I'm turning the page for the first 3/4 of the book to see what this person, protagonist, is going through and how they're going to overcome the obstacles, both internal and external. And then when they get me to the climax, okay, I'm ready to go down the roller coaster at that point. But they've given me 3/4 of the book as to why I want to be there on the roller coaster in the first place. Does that make sense?
I think I completely, this is a great point, John, because, and for folks who are joining us that are writers or thinking about writing or working on their first novel, one thing, again, to really drive home John's point, is when you're looking at reviews of books, you're not necessarily seeing, in a 5-star review, somebody saying this plot is incredible. You're seeing information about the characters and how the reader connected with those characters, how they wanted to see that protagonist develop. And I think, John, that's a really, really great point for people to connect with their audience when they're crafting a novel.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it really becomes one of those that it's that investment in those characters.
Yes.
And John, to your point earlier, I mean, when we think Agatha Christie, we think Poirot or Miss Marple. When we think, obviously, Dorothy L. Sayers, immediately Lord Peter Wimsey. Those are the characters. And, it's, yes, mysteries and, whodunits, police procedurals, what have you. They are plot-driven stories. But at the end of the day, if we don't care about the characters, there's always something else to read.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Or watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big fan, never was a big fan of shoot 'em ups. That wasn't my idea of a good detective novel. My good idea of a detective novel was there's somebody that has died, usually feloniously, and there's someone that is tasked with that job, that thankless job of figuring that out, and there are forces working against that person. Internal, external, bureaucratic, and the villain themselves, to try to thwart that from happening. And to me, the more I know about that individual on that quest, on that journey, the more I see it as being more worthwhile. And this translates outside of crime novels into any other type of genre where we're on the hero's quest or on the journey or whatever. Those are the kind of things that I could follow along with if I know that the stakes are high enough and that the conflict is great enough, and how do they overcome it? And that's something that I'll pay attention to. So anyway.
I have to ask, I know, as it always does, time flies. Our hour goes by very quickly here on the Bookish Hour. But John, I have to ask you, and you've probably been asked this many, many times, your career and the cases that you worked on while you were a police officer, while you were a private investigator, do any of those elements filter over into your fiction, or is everything that you're creating a completely new scenario based on past experiences?
No, it's all out of my past. It all comes somehow. I vanquished all my demons, with the 6-book police procedural series with Marsha O'Shea. I went through the whole gamut of all the stuff that I had to work through myself as an investigator all those years. And then I dealt with some thematic questions or issues that I think everybody's dealing with my Gwendolyn Strong Small Towns mystery series, and how to go about their lives in a virtuous and moral way. And I would say that I maybe had to do a little bit of digging with the locked room mystery because I never had one. But I had a lot of fun with it. And I put things together in a way that Gwendolyn had no support whatsoever from the outside. All the internet was off, no library, no, there was a smoking gun, but essentially everything had to be done real time, FaceTime, ticking clock. And that was a little bit difficult for me, but I relied on my interviewing skills, and I leaned heavily on that as a way that she had to go about her interrogations of the other members of the dinner party. So, yeah, but no, I've borrowed really heavily from my career. To say that I've gone through all of them, hell no. I've got another 1,000. Oh, I've got another 1,000 that I could do. Oh God, I could go on. And at parties I used to. My wife would say, "John, it's time to go home."
So, and speaking of time, before we get to our wrap-up episode, or wrap-up segment, I've got a question that I've got to ask. I'm aging myself because I grew up in the day of what I consider kind of the heyday of the PI television. Rockford Files, Cannon, Columbo, all of those kind of wonderful, wonderful shows. Yeah. And you've obviously spent a number of years as a private investigator, and I would bet most of us who don't do that type of work really don't understand really what you do. Right. From your perspective, is there either a TV show or a series of books that you think best portrays what a private investigator actually does?
I would say to the contrary. Grisham murders PIs. He treats private investigators like crap.
Okay.
I think that Robert Galbraith's Cormoran Strike and Robin Ellicott are two very good examples of realistic private investigators going about their regular jobs, and then they have these horrendous cases thrown in the middle of them. So I would say on that end, yes, Galbraith does a good job with that. TV, I tend to go with the Brits. Midsummer Night Murders. I would say there's a few other ones there that I find to be very procedurally correct. I won't say boring because it does, they tend to get to they solve the case, following the leads, but more so than the way American television and movies have portrayed private investigators as tough talking, wisecracking, sometimes thuggish and felonious behavior. I often say, and this is terrible, but I often say, I know how to pick my nose, but I've never picked a lock.
Okay, nice.
And it's the truth. I wouldn't know how to, and almost every PI picks a lock, and it's like, oh God, can't you think of a more ingenious way to do it? If I was going to start a march on private investigation, it would be, let's not pick locks. Let's find a more ingenious way to get the information. Let's not take the easy way out. Let's not do that. Carrying guns, nah. I'll tell you, if I wanted to carry a gun, my errors and omissions coverage would have to triple. Most likely the gun would be used on me in my own death, right? So, that gunplay is just, we don't have it. I just would say there's other things about investigations. I would say that they play to the mystique, and thank you, Sam Spade. Thank you, Lou Archer. Thank you for all those, the 40s and 50s movies. Thank you for, Jim Garner playing Rockford. But honestly, folks, It's not that at all. It's you use your noodle, you use the computer, use a lot of shoe leather, and you knock on a lot of doors and you talk to a lot of people, and eventually you'll find the information that you're looking for, or you'll give your client the answer that, that it's not there. But essentially, now I'm not a big fan of the way it's treated in the movies or TV. Best would be Galbraith's Cormoran Strike.
Okay.
And Robin Ellicott.
Yes.
Very good advice. And before we do transition into our final 10 minutes, that again, the hour has flown, I just want to share with all of our viewers that tonight we are kind of doing a giveaway for everybody. As John has
John
has 3 short stories that he is sharing that feature Gwendolyn Strong. And again, I'm going to put that link in our chat, so make sure that you guys grab your free copy before we head off and sign off for the evening. And so, JC, what have you read? What have you seen in the past 2 weeks since we last chatted?
Okay, well, I was down all weekend with a nasty man cold, but thank goodness I actually survived. But since I was not doing anything, I binge watched HBO's Succession. And oh my goodness, if you're not familiar with Succession, it is the story of this awful, horrible family who is richer than God, and everybody is plotting against each other. It's like if you took the Game of Thrones and put them in, corporate New York, and it's just, it was compulsive television. I don't think I liked anybody, but I couldn't look away. So it was, that was fun. What I'm reading, other than Odessa on the Delaware, which has been really, really entertaining. John, I was joking with Sarah that you killed more characters in the first 20% of this book than I've killed in all, 12 or 13 of my traditional mysteries. So, and I'm also reading Alex Segura's Secret Identity. This has been nominated for a couple of awards. Alex is a great guy, so that's one I want to make a shout out to. And also, real quick, I want to let you know, John, a couple folks, both Farmhouse Reader and Mark, have said they've already downloaded the freebies. So there you go.
Thank you. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, Sarah, how about you?
So last time we chatted, I'm still in the midst of my writing frenzy, working on my next Glenmire Wim mystery. And when I am writing, it's really hard for me to, after looking at the computer screen for a majority of my day, it's hard to look at a page. So again, I've been doing a lot of listening of audiobooks and whatnot. I actually just started listening to a podcast that's called Strangeland. And John, to your point about true crime podcasts, I am a complete junkie for them. Strangeland, I just started the first season. It is focusing on, it was called the Miracle Mile Massacre, taking place in LA's Koreatown. And it's hosted by Ben O'Dare. And it's, so far, I'm in the second episode, completely hooked, and very much looking forward to binging the whole season. What I'm watching, I started Miss Scarlet and the Duke on PBS Masterpiece. This show was meant for me. Absolutely love it. As well as for leaning towards my sci-fi love, watching Andor on Disney Plus, which seeing the Star Wars universe play out in really kind of like a crime drama is it's really, really fascinating for them to weave a story that you really could have anywhere else in any other galaxy, but set in the world of Star Wars and the Overlord Empire. So we're enjoying it.
And me?
Yes.
Tell us, John.
Thank you.
What are you
All
reading?
right.
What are you watching?
Reading, it's an oldie but goodie. Patricia Highsmith's Stranger on a Train.
Ooh.
1950. That's a train ride, let me tell you. That's a train ride. That's a train wreck. And then I just started last night and I didn't get it right when we first talked about it, but now I got it right. Karen Peary, and it's on
Yes.
BritBox, and it's about a young detective sergeant who gets thrust into a cold case investigation by the boys, and not really expecting anything good to happen from it, but we're going to make it look good. And I just love that, the underdog, and she plays it really well. So it's one season so far. But to your point about Miss Scarlet and the Duke, now that is binge worthy. Let me tell you, I could sit down all weekend with that, but we haven't had any blizzards or snowstorms up here in the Northeast. So I haven't had a chance to really do that. But if that still happens between now and whenever, I think Miss Scarlet and the Duke would be on next for me.
I'm so glad that it's 3 seasons, because I have a nasty habit of finding these amazing shows that I absolutely love, but it's like they're on their first season, and seasons now, instead of being like 25 episodes, they're 8 episodes. It's like, this is not enough for me. So it's always so much good content out there. And again, for our viewers, make sure that you download John's free 3 short stories featuring his heroine, Gwendolyn Strong. And John, thank you so much for being here with us this evening on the Bookish Hour. It was a fascinating conversation covering your career, your writing, learning how to write, building upon the craft itself. Thank you so much for sharing all these incredible insights with us. We hope that you will come back once you have more to tell us about your unnameable project at this point.
I promise I won't hide anything from you.
Perfect.
And hey, John, before we get out of here, for folks who want to, kind of catch up with your writing, where can they find you on social media?
John
A.
John A. Hoda, author, on Facebook,
Okay.
but mostly on my website, which is johnhoda.com, JOHNHODA.com. I answer any queries there. And John at johnhoda.com. I'll politely answer any nice inquiries. So anyhow, I'm glad to always talk. I always enjoy the correspondence with listeners or viewers. And there's an opportunity also at that website, johnhoda.com, if they want to hear my past podcasts, they can.
Yes. John has
and there's a Sarah
podcast.
Burr in there.
There is, yes. That's how, for our viewers, that's how John and I originally connected, through his podcast, which it makes for a great listen. You've had so many amazing writers come on and talk. So definitely encourage folks to check that out. And again,
in those they did all the talking, and I did the listening, which is a little different than tonight. So
you've been in the hot seat. It's been wonderful. Thank you again for joining us here, John. And for everyone who joined us live, thank you. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you being here. Make sure you grab your free download from John for his books, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Our next guest, for those of you who have seen our Bookish Moments segments before, we're going to get some more time actually with debut mystery author Leah Dobrinska when she joins us for a full hour with our next episode. So again, everybody, thank you for being here, and have a wonderful evening. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, folks.